Isaac Newton was not a pleasant man. His relations with other academics were notorious, with most of his later life spent embroiled in heated disputes. Following publications of Principia Mathematica, surely the most influential book ever written in physics, Newton had risen rapidly into public prominence. He was appointed president of the Royal Society and became the first scientist ever to be knighted. Newton soon clashed with the astronomer royal John Flamsteed, who had earlier provided Newton with much needed data for Principia, but was now withholding information that Newton wanted. Newton would not take no for an answer. He had himself appointed to the governing body of the Royal Observatory and then tried to force immediate publication of the data. Eventually, he arranged for Flamsteed's work to be seized and prepared for publication by Flamsteed's mortal enemy Edmund Halley. But Flamsteed took the case to court and, in the nick of time, won a court order preventing distribution of the stolen work. Newton was incensed and sought his revenge by systematically deleting all references to Flamsteed in later editions of Principia.
Calculus, which underlines most of modern physics. Although we now know that Newton discovered calculus years before Leibniz, he published his work much later. A major row ensued over who had been first, with scientists vigorously defending both contenders. It is remarkable, however, that most of the articles appearing in defense of Newton were originally written by his own hand and only published in the name of friends. As the row grew, Leibniz made the mistake of appealing to the Royal Society to resolve the dispute. Newton, as president, appointed an impartial committee to investigate, coincidentally consisting entirely of Newton's friends. But that was not all. Newton then wrote the committee's report himself and had the Royal Society publish it. Officially accusing Leibniz of plagiarism, still unsatisfied, he then wrote an anonymous review of the report in the Royal Society's own periodical. Following the death of Leibniz, Newton is reported to have declared that he had taken great satisfaction in breaking Leibniz's heart. During the period of these two disputes, Newton had already left Cambridge and academy. He had been active in anti-Catholic politics at Cambridge and later in Parliament and was rewarded eventually with the lucrative post of Warden of the Royal Mint. Here he used his talents for divisiveness and vitriol in a more socially acceptable way, successfully conducting a major campaign against counterfeiting, even sending several men to their death on the gallows.
Galileo, perhaps more than any other single person, was responsible for the birth of modern science. His renowned conflict with the Catholic Church was central to his philosophy, for Galileo was one of the first to argue that man could hope to understand how the world works, and, moreover, that we could do this by observing the real world. Galileo had believed Copernican theory since early on, but it was only when he found the evidence needed to support the idea that he started to publicly support it. He wrote about Copernicus' theory in Italian, and soon his views became widely supported outside the universities. This annoyed the Aristotelian professors, who united against him, seeking to persuade the Catholic Church to ban Copernicanism. Galileo, worried by this, traveled to Rome to speak to the ecclesiastical authorities. He argued that the Bible was not intended to tell us anything about scientific theories, and that it was usual to assume that where the Bible conflicted with common sense, it was being allegorical. But the church was afraid of a scandal that might undermine its fight against Protestantism, and so took repressive measures. It declared Copernicanism false and erroneous in 1616 and commanded Galileo never again to defend or hold that doctrine. Galileo acquiesced.
In 1623, a longtime friend of Galileo's became the Pope. Immediately, Galileo tried to get the 1616 decree revoked. He failed, but he did manage to get permission to write a book discussing both Aristotelian and Copernican theories on two conditions. He would not take sides and would come to the conclusion that man could in any case not determine how the world worked because God could bring about the same effects in ways unimagined by man, who could not place restrictions on God's omnipotence. This book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, was completed and published in 1632 with the full backing of the censors, and was immediately greeted throughout Europe as a literary and philosophical masterpiece. Soon the Pope, realizing that people were seeing the book as a convincing argument in favor of Copernicanism, regretted having allowed its publication. The Pope argued that although the book had the official blessing of the censors, Galileo had nevertheless contravened the 1616 decree. He brought Galileo before the Inquisition, who sentenced him to house arrest for life and commanded him to publicly renounce Copernicanism. For a second time, Galileo acquiesced. Galileo remained a faithful Catholic, but his belief in the independence of science had not been crushed. 4 years before his death in 1642, while he was still under house arrest, the manuscript of his second major book was smuggled to a publisher in Holland. It was this work, referred to as Two New Sciences, even more than his support for Copernicus, that was to be the genesis of modern physics.
Albert Einstein. Einstein's connection with the politics of the nuclear bomb is well known. He signed the famous letter to President Franklin Roosevelt that persuaded the United States to take the idea seriously, and he engaged in post-war efforts to prevent nuclear war. But these were not just the isolated actions of a scientist dragged into the world of politics. Politics' life was, in fact, to use his own words, divided between politics and equations. Einstein's earliest political activity came during the First World War, when he was a professor in Berlin. Second, by what he saw as the waste of human lives, he became involved in anti-war demonstrations. His advocacy of civil disobedience and public encouragement of people to refuse conscription did little to endear him to his colleagues. Then, following the war, he directed his efforts towards reconciliation and improving international relations. These two did not make him popular, and soon his politics were making it difficult for him to visit the United States and even to give lectures. Einstein's second great cause was Zionism. Although he was Jewish by descent, Einstein rejected the biblical idea of God. However, a growing awareness of anti-Semitism, both before and during the First World War, led him gradually to identify with the Jewish community and later to become an outspoken supporter of Zionism.
Unpopularity did not stop him from speaking his mind. His theories came under attack. An anti-Einstein organization was even set up. One man was convicted of initiating others to murder Einstein and fined a mere $6. But Einstein was phlegmatic. When a book was published entitled "100 Authors Against Einstein," he retorted, "If I were wrong, then one would have been enough." In 1933, Hitler came to power. Einstein was in America and declared he would not return to Germany. Then, while Nazi militia raided his house and confiscated his bank account, a Berlin newspaper displayed the headline, "Good news from Einstein, he is not coming back." In the face of the Nazi threat, Einstein renounced pacifism, and eventually fearing that German scientists would build a nuclear bomb, proposed that the United States should develop its own. But even before the first atomic bomb had been detonated, he was publicly warning of the dangers of the nuclear war and proposing international control of nuclear weaponry. Throughout his life, Einstein's effort towards peace probably achieved little that would last and certainly won him few friends. His vocal support of the Zionist cause, however, was duly recognized in 1952 when he was offered the presidency of Israel. He declined, saying he thought he was too naive in politics, but perhaps his real reason was different. To quote him again, equations are more important to me because politics is for present, but an equation is something for eternity.